My life of crime began at an early age. I'm sure I was no older than 4 years old. It would have been in 1947. Now, if you're old enough to remember that far back, you remember that, especially in a small town, you send the kids out after breakfast. You don't see them. They roam the streets. They roam the town. When you get old enough to have a bicycle, it's fantastic. You could go anywhere and everywhere in a small town in 1947, and you'd never have to worry. It was a different time. Never have to worry about your kids. They would be okay. Well, I remember this day, I'd wandered down to Main Street, small town. Our house was just a half a block from Main Street, so I wandered all over. I like to wander behind the taverns and the bars where they parked the cars, because when people came and got their keys, they would drop money. You know, I'd find money. I was a rich kid. I'd find that money. Anyway, that day I was wandering. I wandered into one of the local cafes. It was called the Sweet Shop. I remember the name. And as I was wandering around, I looked up on the counter above me, and I saw a display of candy bars. I looked to my right. I looked to my left. I reached up my little hand. I took one of the candy bars, checked again, and put it in my pocket. Went out the door, half a block up to my house, and ate the candy bar. That was the beginning of my life of crime. But I had no sooner eaten that candy bar than I experienced, well, I guess today I would call it existential angst. But I didn't know that word. I didn't know big words back when I was 4 years old. I experienced that I was diminished as a human being. Now, children can have those feelings. Children can feel things and experience things that they can't express. And it was an awful feeling. It was a feeling that I was no longer the person that I had been before. I had done something that diminished me. And it wasn't that I was worried about having broken the 8th commandment. I was 4 years old. I didn't know the commandments. And it wasn't that I was worried about being arrested and sent to jail. My uncle was the sheriff. He was county sheriff. I was safe. It was a sense that my life was less than it had been before. And so somewhere, I don't know where I got it, but I found a nickel. You know, candy bars were only a nickel back in those days. I found a nickel, and I went back into the sweet shop. And I looked, and nobody was watching, and I put the nickel where candy bars were sitting. Scared to death, terrified that someone would see that, and I would have to explain what I had done. That was the beginning of my life of crime. Thou shalt not steal. It's the 8th commandment. And it is not unique to the Judeo-Christian tradition. If you would go back a few hundred years before that, and in the Code of Hammurabi, back in the ancient world, there's a lot said about theft and stealing. We cannot have human society. We cannot live together as human beings if people steal. Theft. And so every religion and all cultures everywhere, as far as I know, I don't know another culture or place or time in the history of the world where theft and stealing are not restricted and considered in every religion and every society either a sin are a crime. Thou shalt not steal. John Calvin, who is so wonderfully remembered by Presbyterians, once said that the commandments mean more than they say. The commandments mean more than they say. And so the commandment that's given in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not steal, takes on a life that grows and develops through the biblical witness. When we get to the book of Malachi, which we read today, the question was, will a person, a man, a woman, rob God? And the people say, how would we rob God? And the prophet says, by holding back, by holding on, by clutching, by keeping to yourself. It's more than just taking from someone else. It's also withholding what you have. You're stealing. You're robbing God. And then when that commandment gets to the New Testament, in the first epistle of John, the writer says, if you are a person with material wealth, if you have goods, material goods, and you see a brother or sister who is in need, and you don't respond, you don't have pity, you don't act, how can you say that the love of God resides in your heart? So the eighth commandment means more than it says. It takes on a greater life. It reminds us that we are to let go, that we are to give away. How do we do that? Isn't that a hard thing to do? Isn't it so very difficult to let go of what we have? The only way we could possibly do that is to live under what, again, I'll use the name John Calvin. He didn't think this up, but he talked about it a lot. And if you scratch a Presbyterian under the skin, you will find that every Presbyterian who ever lived or breathes believes in this thing called the sovereignty of God. That's a strong Presbyterian belief. It's sort of the bedrock of what Presbyterians are. We believe in the sovereignty of God. And that means not only is God king and ruler, not only is God the one who is in charge, but it means that God, three words, these are very important. God sustains and nourishes and cares for the world. Some of our early founders in America believed that God created the world and then sent it into space, whirling into space, and it's completely disassociated from what happens in the world. That was the religion of Thomas Jefferson and many of those early people who were the founding people of our nation. That was a popular thing to believe in. God made the world, God sent it into space, and then lets it go. It's on its own. The sovereignty of God is just exactly opposite of that. Not only has God created the world and sent it into space spinning, but God sustains and nourishes and cares for the world that God has made. God is active and alive and is participating. The sovereignty of God means that God's involved in every breath we take and every act of our daily lives. Every moment that we live is lived in the gratitude that we have. Here is a God who is sustaining life. and nourishing life and caring for all the life in the world. And if we believe that, we're not afraid. We're not afraid of what's going to happen next. Our lives are not our own. We're not in charge. God's holding the world, nourishing, caring, sustaining the world and all of life. We need not be afraid. In the Old Testament, as the people of Israel were going across the wilderness, they were fed by manna. Do you remember manna? They didn't know where tomorrow's meal was going to come from. They were in the wilderness. They were estranged from society, from culture, from cities. How are we going to live now? And so they experienced this thing called manna. And they said, it came from heaven, this manna, this food that sustained us. Actually, it was a plant that grew in the desert. But for them, it was from heaven. And it came every day. Just as they needed it. It came, it fell from God's hands. God's gift. And they couldn't store it. Well, they could for the Sabbath day, but during the week they couldn't store it. They had to receive it each day. And if they tried to store some, if they tried to build their own security, you see that? If they tried to make security their thing by storing it up, 2 days supply, 3 days, it would rot and they couldn't eat it. Every day, as the day came, there was God. Faithful, sovereign, sustaining, nurturing, and caring for the world in which God lives. Friends, our security is in God. God is our only security. There's nothing else that can keep us, save us. Security is in God alone. I'm always sort of amused when I read about some famous life, and they say, you know, at the end of the life, this person who was so famous, who did all these great things, this person died penniless. Friends, if you haven't figured this out yet, we all die penniless. No line of credit, no savings, no credit cards, nothing. When we take this step from this life to the next life, we take nothing with us. We die penniless. But we live in the sovereignty and care. And what that means is that all the things of this world, we have a detachment from them. You know, our houses, our cars, our bank accounts, our money, our farms, our lands, whatever we have. There's a certain amount of detachment from it. We don't hold on too tightly. We realize that this isn't ours. This isn't mine. And whatever it is, it's for the glory of God. And it's for the needs of a wounded world. That's why we have what we have. Everything that God has put in your life, everything, is for the glory of God, for you to use to the glory of God, and for the wounds and hurts of the world. I bought a car just a few days ago. The car I was driving car I was driving, the Mercury, was 9 years old, but my daughter in North Carolina was driving an 18-year-old car we had given her, and it was really falling apart. It would go out of gas, when it was half full. I mean, it was breaking down all the time. In fact, we went and got it, and it broke down in West Virginia on the way home. So I gave her the Mercury, and I bought her a 2-year-old car. I bought a 2-year-old car. It's out there in the parking lot. It's a white. It's the one that says, "Love thy neighbor, no exceptions," on the windshield. I hope somebody doesn't throw a rock through my window. Yeah. Love thy neighbor, no exceptions. And I got the car. It's 2 years old. It was in a wreck. It's not even certified. And but the price was right, so I bought it. And as I was driving it, as soon as I got it home, I'm not trying to make myself a hero here. Preachers sometimes try to make themselves look good, and I'm not. I'm just saying this is my hope. This is my goal, okay? I was driving the car, and I said, "God, this is not mine. This is your car, and I dedicate it to you." And so maybe in this car, Lord, you can help me to visit somebody in the hospital who might be sick, or go to someone who's lonely and needs a friendship or caring, or drive up to Economy where those Presbyterians are doing church and be a part of their congregation. Lord, this is yours. I dedicate it to you, that it will be used to your glory and for the needs of your people. That's my hope. Maybe I won't live that every day, but that's my hope. Everything is for the glory of God. You'll give it up someday. You're going to walk away from it. You're going to walk into the next life. You're going to leave everything behind. But until you do that, for the glory of God, for the wounds and needs of the world. I don't know. Some of you may have seen the play Les Mis. Have any of you seen it on stage? Isn't that great? I took a busload of church people to Toronto, Canada to see it. It's the best thing I've ever seen on stage. Or the movie. Any of you seen the movie? Some of you seen. You know the story. I don't know about the movie, but the play misses one of the key parts of the story. And if you read the book, Jean Valjean, who's the main character here, he's the mayor of the city. He blesses life everywhere he goes, but he has a story. When he was a young man, and this is in the book, not in the play. I don't know about the movie. I haven't seen the movie. But in the book, Jean Valjean is a young man. His sister's child is hungry. And he breaks into a bakery and steals a loaf of bread. He's caught and is imprisoned. And because he tries to break out a number of times, his imprisonment extends 19 years. And after 19 years, Jean Valjean, now bitter, trusts no one, hardened, ex-convict, bitter toward the world, begins to wander across the countryside, and he comes into a village, and he's cold, and he's hungry, and he asks somebody where he could find some food or lodging, and the person points to the priest's, the bishop's house, the rectory. Try there. He goes into the bishop's house, and he's welcomed in, he's served dinner, he's given a bed for the night, and in the middle of the night, he wakes up and he thinks about those silver forks and spoons and knives. And he gets up in the middle of the night, he steals the silver and takes off. Well, the police see this guy kind of acting funny, running across the countryside, and they stop him to question him and see that he has stolen goods, and he's taken back to the rectory. And as soon as they arrive, the police expect, of course, that the priest is going to be glad to get his goods back, and press charges against this thief, stole the silver. And the priest looks at Jean Valjean and says, I'm so glad you came back. You forgot to take the candlesticks. I want you to have them as well. And of course, the police are dismissed. That morning in the book, in the story, the priest's sisters and the housekeeper are just fuming. How are we going to eat? We don't have any silver, knives, forks, and spoons. How are we going to eat? Oh, they were in terrible shape. And the bishop said to them, was this silver ours? See, he understood, didn't he? He understood the 8th commandment. Nothing is ours. Nothing. We hold it, we're stewards of it. But nothing is ours. Nothing at all. And then he says to the sister and to the housekeeper, he says, he says, I've been worried about holding on to this silver. It's not ours, and I'm so glad that it found a poor person, because that's who it belonged to, not to me. It's a great story. It's a great book. And so Jean Valjean says to the priest says to Jean Valjean, before he sends him out. And Jean Valjean, of course, will become an extraordinary person. He will redeem all the lives around him. He will take into his own house and adopt as his own child the daughter of the prostitute who died, make her his own. He becomes a marvelous person. But the key to his life is that moment where the priest says to him that he has purchased his soul. He says, you no longer belong to evil, but to good. I have purchased your soul. I have purchased your soul, and I have given it to God. That's what things are for, you see. And at some point in time, it's not easy to know how to give. It's not easy to know when to give. But for the priest, it was his moment to give away what he had for the glory of God and for the wounds of the world. If you've seen the movie, or if you've seen the play, Jean Valjean has a beautiful song that he sings. If I can remember the words, it begins like this. God on high, hear my prayer. In my need, you have always been there. Isn't that beautiful? God on high, hear my prayer. In my need, you have always been there. That's what gives us the strength to keep the 8th commandment. Let's take a moment to think about that.